This is just the old man who paid bills once, my son said. Laughing beside his new in-laws, I smiled. But something in me went still, a quiet that settled deeper than shame. The next morning, they learned who signed their company's checks. Before I tell you how it all turned around, hit subscribe and let me know which state you're listening from. I want to see how far this story travels. The evening air carried that low hum of laughter, wine glasses clinking and a jazz trio playing somewhere near the bar. I'd come to the event as a favor. My son's wife had invited me weeks before. She'd said it would mean a lot if I attended. I'd even gone to the trouble of getting a new suit, pressed the sleeves, and polished my shoes. The name on the invitation read, Atlantic View Industries Annual Appreciation Banquet. Funny thing was, that name used to sit on the corner of every check I signed for 27 years. I arrived early, as I always did. I like to watch people arrive, see how they carried themselves when they thought no one was looking. The ballroom smelled faintly of cedar and cologne, with those white tablecloths that wrinkle if you even look at them wrong. I stood near the entrance, hands folded, watching my son laugh with his wife and her parents. He looked good. Tailored suit, neat haircut, the easy grin he'd learned from his mother. I was proud, until the introductions began. Dad, he called, loud enough for the people at the next table to hear. You remember my father-in-law, Mr. Harlan? And this? He gestured my way with that half-smirk. This is just the old man who paid bills once. Laughter rippled around the group like a cheap wind. His wife's mother chuckled politely. His wife looked down at her drink. Mr. Harlan froze mid-handshake. I kept mine outstretched a second longer than necessary, then withdrew it slowly. I didn't say a word. I just smiled. Small and steady because silence, the right kind Wells caught makes people nervous. I found a chair at the back near the service door, the kind where the sound of dishes clinking and waiters whispering filled the spaces that words couldn't. From there, I watched my son talk big about projects, clients, deadlines. He didn't know that the company hosting that event was under new management. My management. When I'd retired 3 years ago, I'd kept a share most people forgot about. The board never asked for my opinion, but they still mailed those reports every quarter. And 6 months ago, when the company merged, my old name quietly appeared again. Walter C. Jennings, Senior Advisor. I wasn't angry. Anger is noisy, and noise never helped a man think straight. Instead, I thought about the nights he'd called me for gas money in college, the tuition payments I made, the car I bought him when his engine seized, all those late nights when I told myself, he'll learn gratitude one day. Turns out he learned performance instead. Dinner began. A 3-course affair served with speeches and toasts. When the CEO took the stage, the logo projected behind him glowed bright blue. Atlantic View Industries, in partnership with Jennings Development Group. Mr. Harlan's fork paused mid-air. He leaned forward slightly, then turned toward me, expression caught between surprise and embarrassment. My son didn't see it right away. He was busy explaining some market chart to his wife's cousin. But when the applause came and my name was mentioned among founding contributors, his face changed. The smirk vanished. He stopped mid-sentence, looked across the tables, and finally saw me. I raised my glass slightly. Not a toast, just acknowledgement, the kind that says, I know what you said, and I don't need to repeat it. The rest of the night moved slowly. He tried to approach me once halfway across the dance floor, but the CEO intercepted him, shaking my hand first. The CEO had always liked me, said I had old-school patience. We spoke briefly about future plans, quietly enough that my son couldn't hear. Then I left. I've always believed that when someone underestimates you, you don't correct them. You let life do that for you. Outside, the night smelled like rain and magnolia. I loosened my tie, feeling the cool wind off the water. The parking lot lights hummed softly. As I walked toward my truck, I saw my son running behind me, calling, Dad, wait. But I didn't stop. He caught up beside the truck, breathless, face flushed. Dad, I didn't mean it like that, he said. It was just a joke. I looked at him. That same boy who used to hold my hand crossing Main Street. Then keep laughing, I said quietly. He opened his mouth to say more, but no words came. I got in, started the engine, and rolled down the window just enough to say one thing. Son, Sometimes a joke is just truth wearing a smile. I drove away before he could answer. The reflection of the ballroom lights shimmered in the windshield, fading behind me as the road curved toward the bridge. The city skyline glowed faintly in the distance, the same skyline I'd helped build. Brick by brick, year by year, as I crossed the bridge, I thought about something my father used to say. When folks stop respecting where they came from, they start losing where they're going. That night, I didn't lose anything. I just realized what was already gone. The rain began to fall, meant slow, rhythmic drops tapping the hood. Each mile felt quieter than the last. By the time I reached the outskirts of town, the radio was the only voice left. An old country song came on, one my wife used to hum in the kitchen. You live, you learn, you let go. I smiled for the first time that night. I checked my phone once when I stopped for gas. 3 missed calls.
1 text, Dad, please call me. I didn't, instead.
I filled the tank, folded the receipt neatly, and placed it in the glove box beside an old family photo, all of us smiling, before time divided the table. The rain had stopped when I pulled into my driveway. The house lights were off. The porch creaked softly in the damp air. I sat in the truck for a moment, listening to the engine wind down. Then I reached over, turned the key, and let silence have the last word. But that was only the beginning. As I drove the next morning, mist hanging over the 2-lane road out toward the old mill, the numbers came back before the pain did. 4 years of tuition, 2 wedding loans, 1 down payment. Every figure still etched in my mind like the grooves on that worn steering wheel. Back when my boy was starting college, I'd worked 12-hour shifts to keep him afloat. I skipped vacations, sold the fishing boat, and drove the same truck long past when the brakes began to whine. When the engine finally died, I rebuilt it myself. That's what fathers do. They build, they patch, they keep the lights on. I remembered the nights he'd call at midnight, his voice shaky with worry over rent or exams. I'd wire money, no questions asked. When he married, I handed him the deed to the lake house, said it was time he had a place of his own. He'd hugged me tight that day, whispered, "I won't forget this." Maybe that's what stung most, not the words at that dinner, but how easy forgetting had become for him. Every sacrifice had turned invisible, folded into expectation. The numbers blurred together as the miles rolled on. $7,400 for that first year of tuition, $2,800 for his truck repairs, another $15,000 for the wedding catering he couldn't cover. A ledger of love written in silent ink. By the time I reached the stoplight near the courthouse, I'd stopped keeping count. Money wasn't the debt that hurt. Memory was. I thought I was building his future. Turns out, I was erasing mine. I checked into the small roadside motel just outside Wilmington, the Driftwood Inn. The sign flickered between vacancy and vacancy, a fitting metaphor for how things felt inside me. The room smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant, the air conditioner rattling like an old friend trying to make conversation. I set my small suitcase on the bed and sat beside it for a while, listening to the rain tick against the window. It wasn't loneliness I felt, not exactly. It was a kind of quiet I hadn't heard in years, the kind that gives you room to think. I unpacked one thing at a time, a toothbrush, razor, notebook, reading glasses. Each movement had a rhythm to it, steady and deliberate. When I reached the bottom of the bag, I found the old photograph again, my son at 10 years old, holding the model airplane we built together on a humid July afternoon. I set it on the nightstand face down, not out of anger, just peace. That evening I walked to the diner across the street. The waitress, a kind woman named Jo, poured me coffee without asking. She had the look of someone who's seen people rebuild from worse. "Passing through?" she asked. "Not this time," I said. She nodded like she understood more than I'd said. Back in the room, I opened my laptop. The login still worked for the corporate board portal, Jennings Development Group. I checked the quarterly files, contracts, employee lists, partner companies. My son's name appeared in one of the regional divisions, a small subcontractor connected to Atlantic View's maintenance wing. Interesting. I began to make notes. Nothing vengeful, nothing emotional, just facts. Dates, names, transfers. I wrote in that same notebook I'd once used for household budgets. Every figure, every contact aligned neatly in rows. I made coffee from the little packet by the sink, drank it black. By midnight, the pages formed a plan, one not to punish, but to reclaim order. When I finally turned off the lamp, the hum of the air conditioner sounded softer somehow. Outside, the rain had stopped. The parking lot lights reflected off the wet pavement like small promises waiting to be kept. Tomorrow would be the first real Sunday morning broke pale and cool, with gulls circling low over the motel roof. I brewed another thin cup of coffee from the packet and sat by the small desk near the window. It was time to begin. Not with anger, but paperwork. The first call went to the bank. "Good morning, this is Walter Jennings. I need to update ownership records on a retained asset account," I said, slow and even. The woman on the other end sounded young but sharp. "Of course, Mr. Jennings, I'll pull it up." We walked through the details, joint signers, linked accounts, legacy access. By the time we finished, my son's name was gone from every digital trace it didn't belong to. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was clean. Next came the insurance company. I gave them policy numbers, dates, and beneficiary updates. The clerk read each one back carefully, voice tightening when she realized the depth of correction. "Yes, sir. The records will now list only you as primary." "Thank you," I said. "That's how it always should have been." After that, I contacted the estate attorney who'd handled my late wife's will. "Tom," I said when he answered, "I think it's time to revisit the file." He didn't ask why, just said, "Come by Monday morning." Some men understand without words. Tom was one of them. By noon, I'd called the credit bureau to freeze any secondary access. It took 3 verification codes and 1 patient sigh. But when it was done, I leaned back in the chair and exhaled, step by step. Account by account, the fog cleared. The afternoon drifted quiet. I organized every confirmation email, printed copies, and slid them into a manila folder. The label read, "Jennings, Active Affairs." It looked plain enough, but it felt like a declaration, calm, factual. As the sun set over the motel sign, I walked across the street to Joe's diner again. She poured me another coffee, noticed the folder under my arm, and said softly, "Making progress?" "Making order," I replied. She smiled. "That's the better kind." Back in the room, I placed the folder in the drawer beside my bed. The hum of the neon outside pulsed slow and steady, a heartbeat for a life finally back under my own name. Step by step, account by account, I was reclaiming everything that had been taken, not through anger, but through precision. The next morning arrived slower than usual. Light crept in through the thin motel curtains, painting faint stripes across the bedspread. For the first time in years, my phone didn't buzz with someone else's emergencies. No calls about bills, repairs, or favors. Just silence, steady and neutral. I sat by the window with a fresh cup of coffee and watched the traffic crawl along the highway. People heading somewhere, chasing deadlines I no longer had to fund. Across the street, Joe wiped down tables before the breakfast rush. The world kept turning, same as ever. Only this time I was watching it on my own terms. I took the manila folder from the drawer, opened it, and ran a hand over the papers. Confirmations, updates, receipts. Proof that my life was back in my own handwriting. Strange thing about freedom. It's quieter than you expect. It doesn't cheer or sing. It just settles in like morning light on clean glass. Outside, a couple walked by holding hands, laughing about something small. Their voices faded into the sound of passing cars. But it reminded me of what I'd lost, not money, but ease. Still, there was peace in the absence of noise. I knew the storm hadn't passed entirely. The silence felt too still for that. Sooner or later, the echoes of what I'd done would find their way back to me, before silence became the only language left between me and what used to be called home. It began with missed calls, 1 or 2 at first, then 10 unknown numbers, local codes. Each message sounded the same, rushed breathing, a voice straining between guilt and pride. Then came the texts. "Dad, please, can we talk?" I didn't reply. Instead, I watched the motel clock tick past noon, the hand steady as a heartbeat. Silence, I'd learned, was the most disciplined form of speech. By midweek, a note slid under my door. "We're coming by. We need to explain." It wasn't signed, but I recognized the handwriting, my son's wife. Polite loops on the edges of her letters. Saturday morning arrived with a soft knock. 3 taps. Hesitant as if even the wood was ashamed, I opened the door. My son stood there thinner, face pale, his wife just behind him clutching a folder. The hall smelled of coffee and rain-damp carpet. "Dad," he said quietly, "can we come in?" I stepped aside. They sat on the edge of the bed like children waiting for a verdict. I poured them each a cup from the pot, though neither touched it. "I didn't mean for that dinner to sound like it did," he started. "It was supposed to be lighthearted." "You meant it enough to say it," I replied. My voice wasn't sharp, just steady, the way a gavel sounds when it lands once. He looked down at his hands. People laughed. I didn't want to make it awkward. I nodded slowly. "You succeeded." For a moment, no one spoke. The hum of the air conditioner filled the space between us. Then his wife set the folder on the table and pushed it toward me. "You should see this," she said. Inside were unpaid invoices, bounced checks, and emails from suppliers, all with his signature at the bottom. His company was drowning. The event that night, a desperate pitch to hide it. I leafed through the papers without comment. He shifted, restless. "I was trying to keep things running. I thought maybe your name would help. That partnership made people trust us." "You used it," I said quietly. "You didn't ask." He opened his mouth, closed it again. The weight of truth settled over the room. "I never wanted to hurt you," he whispered. "Hurt isn't always about wanting," I said. "Sometimes it's just about needing something too badly." His wife's eyes were wet now. "Mr. Jennings," she said softly. "He's been trying to fix it. We didn't know what else to do." I looked at her. Kind woman, wrong company. "The problem," I said, "isn't the debt. It's the story you built to cover it." He stood abruptly, pacing. I was scared. "I didn't want you to think I failed." I leaned back in the chair. "Son, you didn't fail because you fell short. You failed because you lied." The words hung there, unshakable. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft click of the motel sign outside. Blinking. Vacancy. He sat down again, shoulders slumped. "What do you want me to do?" I met his eyes. "Tell the truth. To them, to me, to yourself," he swallowed hard. "And after that?" I shrugged lightly. "That's not my concern anymore." He looked smaller somehow. The posture of a man seeing his reflection for the first time. I reached for my wallet. Pulled out an old photograph. Him as a boy holding that model airplane. Face full of hope. "I kept this because it reminded me of who you were," I said. "Not who you've become." His voice cracked. "Dad, please don't shut me out." "I'm not shutting you out," I replied. "I'm stepping back so you can see the space you created." He covered his face with his hands. His wife reached for him, whispering something I couldn't hear. After a moment, I stood and opened the door. Outside, the morning sun had burned through the mist. The parking lot shimmered in the heat. "You'll figure it out," I said. "You always do, when you have to." He hesitated at the doorway, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "I thought silence meant you didn't care." I shook my head. "No, silence means I finally do." They left without another word. I watched their car pull away, taillights blinking against the sunlight. I sat back down, finished the coffee they'd ignored, and stared at the folder they'd left behind. It wasn't just debt. It was confession in paperwork form. Numbers, balances, timelines, evidence that truth eventually collects its own interest. I packed the papers neatly into my own file, labeled a new section, Son, Liabilities, 2025. Then I stepped outside. The air smelled of pine and ocean salt. A small diner sign flickered down the street. I walked there, keys in hand, boots steady on the cracked sidewalk. Inside, Joe smiled. "Rough morning?" "Necessary one," I said. She poured my coffee and left me to the quiet. The spoon clinked softly against the cup, rhythmic and grounding. Outside, a church bell rang somewhere across town. I picked up my keys again, thinking maybe breakfast there would help clear my head. After all, every new chapter deserves a... The following Monday came wrapped in fog and the low hum of distant gulls. I'd slept little, my mind circling that folder of debts like a hawk over open fields. By dawn, I'd made up my mind it was time to stop feeling and start understanding. I walked down to the diner again. Joe refilled my cup before I even sat down. "You look like a man doing math," she said. "Closer to an audit," I replied. At the corner booth sat Harold, an old acquaintance from my company days, former accountant, part-time consultant now. He'd aged well in the way calm men do. His eyes still held that exacting glint that used to catch missing numbers faster than software ever could. "Morning, Walt," he said. "Heard you were in town. Thought retirement would have spoiled you by now." I smiled faintly. Retirement's just quieter work with fewer handshakes. We talked for a while. Nothing heavy, just old chatter about fishing spots and property taxes. Then I steered the conversation. "Harold," I said, lowering my voice, "you still handle corporate filings for local contractors?" He nodded. "Some. You got something specific?" I slid him a folded sheet from my jacket, the subcontractor letterhead from my son's company. "Can you look into who's listed as guarantor?" He raised an eyebrow. "You think he's borrowed under your name?" I didn't answer. He understood anyway. "Give me a day," he said quietly. I left him with that paper and walked the shoreline. The fog was lifting, sunlight pushing through in silver shards. Every step I took felt lighter, sharper, the kind that comes when grief starts hardening into clarity. That evening, Harold called. "Walt," he said, his tone changed. "All business. You were right to ask. The bank paperwork lists your old LLC as secondary guarantor. He must have used legacy credentials from before the merger." I said nothing. He continued. "2 loans, both recent. Around 70,000 combined. If those default, they'd come after your retired assets." I stood by the window, the phone pressed tight against my ear. Outside, the motel sign flickered again, that soft pulse of red and white. "Can you send me copies?" I asked. "Already did," he said. "And Walt, one more thing. His father-in-law co-signed the second one. That stopped me. So that's why the man had gone silent that night at the banquet. He knew. He just didn't expect I did too." I hung up and opened my laptop. The email was there, attachments lined up like evidence waiting for a judge. Loan contracts. Digital signatures. One had my company's name where it didn't belong. The betrayal hadn't been about embarrassment anymore. It was business. Cold, deliberate, and expensive. I printed the documents and placed them in a new section of my folder. The label, Unauthorized Liabilities. Then I made a list of calls. Short, direct procedural, first the bank, second, the Regional Finance Bureau. Third, my attorney, Tom. Each call ended the same way. "We'll investigate immediately, Mr. Jennings." Polite voices, steady and factual, the tone people use when they realize the paperwork favors you. By nightfall, the facts were lined up. My son had used my legacy account details to secure bridge loans under false authorization. Not theft, not legally. Just a misuse of name and trust, the kind that walks a fine line between mistake and fraud. I leaned back in the chair and let the hum of the air conditioner fill the room. The fog outside had cleared entirely now. The moonlight hit the wet pavement, reflecting everything sharp and bright. I poured myself another cup of motel coffee and sat by the window. The papers were stacked neatly on the table, their edges squared like soldiers. No anger came, just clarity. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about record. He'd written his story with borrowed ink. I would correct it with signatures. The next morning I visited Harold again. He had a folder ready, thicker this time. "I traced the filings," he said. "You're in the clear. The new structure legally shields your assets. But you'll want to alert the fraud unit before he tries again." He handed me a single notarized letter. "Verification of ownership and control. Take this to the bank. It'll end any dispute fast." I nodded, took his hand, and felt that old, firm grip that used to mean deals were sealed by trust alone. As I stepped out into the street, the sun broke through the last of the morning haze. The town's church bells rang 8 times. Each toll felt like a confirmation. I walked to the bank, documents under my arm, the smell of salt and asphalt mixing in the air. Inside, the clerk greeted me with the kind of politeness reserved for steady customers. Within 30 minutes, the files were reviewed, signatures verified, and records corrected. By the time I left, my name was clean again, legally and symbolically. I stopped outside, watching the flag above the post office ripple in the warm breeze. Everything that had been hidden now sat in daylight. And for the first time in months, peace felt earned, not imagined. I buttoned my jacket, turned toward the diner across the street and thought about tomorrow. Because tomorrow, I'd walk into that station with evidence, not emotion. The motel room had turned into my office. Each morning I opened the blinds, set my coffee on the desk, and lined up the folders in a neat row. Liabilities, unauthorized loans, family matters, evidence correspondence. The hum of the air conditioner was steady, a metronome for a life back under my control. Monday morning I called Tom Pritchard, my attorney. Time to make it official, I told him. He simply said, bring everything. No emotion, just ink. I liked that. At his office, the smell of lemon polish and paper hung in the air. Tom flipped through my folders slowly, his pen scratching quick notes in the margins. When he finished, he nodded. You've already done the work, he said. We'll file the freezes and ownership corrections today. He smiled slightly. Clean work, Walt, real clean. For 2 hours we filled out affidavits, all facts, no adjectives. Every page had a notary stamp, every line checked twice. When he handed me the final set, he said, once these are logged, no one can touch your assets. If your son tries again, it's a violation. I didn't feel relief, just balance returning. The courthouse downtown stood like it always had, white stone against the blue Carolina sky. Inside, the marble floors echoed with the footsteps of people trying to fix their lives. I walked up to the records desk, handed over the stack, and watched the clerk stamp each page. That solid, repetitive thunk that sounded like justice finding its rhythm. He slid them back with a polite smile. All in order, Mr. Jennings, case file Darger 24016C. That number felt heavier than any apology I'd ever wanted. Next came the police station. Detective Harris met me at the front desk. Same grin, same sharp eyes. Walter, he said, you don't age. You just change fonts. I laughed once quietly. Got something you'll want to see, I said, and laid out the printed evidence and forged digital filings, unauthorized use of name. He read them slowly, jaw tightening. Could be fraud if intent's clear, he said. You pressing charges? I shook my head. No, just the truth on record. He nodded. We'll keep it clean. Back at the motel, Harold left a voicemail. Checked into it, Walt. You're in the clear. Bender's got notice and all liabilities his now. I replayed it twice, not for the words, but for the certainty in his tone. I opened my notebook and wrote, confirmed, all records clean as of May 6th. Simple sentence. Heavy piece. That night I walked to the pier. The boards creaked beneath my boots, the tide slapped against the pylons. The salt wind cut through the humidity. I thought about all the times I'd bailed my son out, believing I was protecting him. Maybe I wasn't raising him to stand. Maybe I was teaching him I'd never let him fall. That's the danger of love when it turns into rescue. I realized then that silence was not distance. It was detox. When I came back, I typed a message to Tom confirming the filings for the next day. My reflection in the laptop screen looked older. Yes, but grounded. The storm wasn't inside me anymore. It was written down, signed, filed, and notarized, right where it belonged. The next morning, Joe poured my coffee at the diner and said, folks talking at the hardware store. Word is your son's business hit a wall. I stirred my cup slowly. Rumors travel fast, she smiled. True ones travel faster. Down the counter, an old man from the post office called. Walt, saw your name on the courthouse list. Updating ownerships? Just house cleaning, I said. No speech, no explanation. The truth doesn't need advertising. It just breathes on its own. When I stepped out, the church bell rang twice. The sky was bright, the air clean. In towns like Wilmington, truth travels faster than rumor. And it doesn't stop. Back at the motel, I placed the latest filings in the drawer. The label read, Public Record, filed and verified. 4 plain words that meant more than any reconciliation could. The phone buzzed again, another unknown number. I let it ring. Control didn't need to answer anymore. Outside, the motel sign hummed in red neon against the dusk. I poured the last of the coffee and watched the light flicker against the wet pavement. My father used to say, justice isn't loud, it's just patient. I smiled, thinking how right he was. By the time Sunday service ended that week, the truth had already started whispering my name. Everything from here on would be handled by paper, not pain. The peace didn't last long. By Thursday, whispers began to swirl through town. Half concern, half speculation. I could feel it in the diner, in the post office line, even in the way the cashier smiled a little too tightly when handing me change. My son's story was unraveling and people were trying to decide who to believe. The truth was steady on its own. Lies have to jog to keep up. Saturday morning, I walked to the farmer's market for bread and peaches. Folks nodded as I passed. One man said, "Heard about the mess. You handled it right." Another just tipped his cap. That was all the judgment I needed. No gossip, just quiet respect. Small towns don't need newspapers. They have coffee counters. But by that evening, the rumor flipped. Someone claimed I'd frozen my son's accounts out of spite, that I was senile and vindictive. It didn't take long to trace the new version back to him. His friends, his wife's cousins, all repeating the same line. The old man's lost it. I didn't answer. I documented every post, every message, every phone call that came through. The louder the lies got, the calmer I became. 2 days later, Detective Harris called. Walter got a weird one. Someone filed a concern about elder financial abuse. Guess who signed it? I didn't need to guess. I could almost hear my son's voice coaching his lawyer through it. Harris sighed. "We know it's nothing. Still, we've got to log it," I said. "Log it twice." He laughed. "You're unshakable, old man." "Just methodical," I told him. That night, a storm rolled in off the coast. Lightning flared against the motel curtains, thunder pacing like an argument outside my door. Around 9, the knock came. 3 times, same rhythm as before. When I opened it, he stood there, rain soaking his shirt. His eyes looked different this time, tired, frightened, cornered. "Dad, please, can we talk?" I stepped aside. He stayed standing, shifting from foot to foot like a boy caught lying. "They're saying things about me," he started.
About us.
"You have to help." His voice cracked on the last word. "Sit down," I said quietly. He did. The room smelled of damp carpet and lightning.
Help with what? I asked.
"The contracts? The bills? The truth?" He looked at me, desperate. "You're the only one who can fix this. They listen to you." I folded my hands. "You mean they used to?" He took a step closer, tears just behind his voice. "You're my father. You can't let me drown like this." I let the silence stretch until it filled the whole room. Then I said, "Son, you built the boat. I just stepped off it." He sank onto the edge of the bed, head in his hands. For a moment, I almost reached out, old reflex. Then I saw the glint of calculation return in his eyes. "We could tell them you misunderstood, that it was a mix-up." "There's no misunderstanding in signatures," I said. "Ink doesn't lie." He tried one more time. "Dad, I'm having a baby." I froze. "A baby?" His voice softened. "We're expecting. I just wanted to make things right before you're gone." That line almost worked. Almost. I felt the pull of it. Legacy, forgiveness, bloodline. But then I caught the slip in his tone. Too practiced, too timely. He wasn't telling me to heal. He was bargaining. I nodded slowly. "Congratulations," I said. "A child deserves a father who tells the truth." He looked up, startled. "So you'll help?" "I already did," I said. "By keeping the records." His face hardened. "You'd really watch your own son fall?" I stood and opened the door. "If falling's the only way you'll learn the ground's real." He hesitated, jaw trembling. Then he left, the hallway light flickering behind him. I watched through the window as he got into his car, headlights cutting through the rain. For a second I hoped he'd stop, come back, say something honest. He didn't. The taillights disappeared into the storm. When the quiet returned, I sat back down and pulled the motel pad toward me. I wrote down the exact time he arrived, what he said, the mention of the baby, every detail. Then I folded the paper and slipped it into the Family Matters folder. Each note replaced an argument I didn't have to repeat. Proof always outlives emotion. By dawn, the rain had passed. The world outside smelled clean again. Joe waved from across the street, broom in hand. The sky broke open with a soft blue light that felt like mercy, not triumph. I finished my coffee and thought about what Harris had said. Unshakable. Maybe that's all justice really is, staying still while everyone else flails. That afternoon, people in town stopped whispering. They already knew. Truth has a way of settling the dust on its own. The rumors shrank in the sunlight. Facts took their place. He shouted louder, but I just filed more evidence. She cried, I listened, and wrote everything down. By Sunday morning, peace felt less like forgiveness and more like proof. By the next week, the town had already chosen its side. You could tell by how people looked at me when I walked into the diner. Not pity, respect. The kind reserved for those who've survived something messy but kept their hands clean. Even Jo poured my coffee slower, like she knew I was carrying something heavy but precise. On Wednesday afternoon, I drove into town to pick up the revised estate papers from Tom's office. The courthouse steps were crowded that day. Lawyers, delivery drivers, a few locals who liked to linger for gossip. And there, standing in the middle of it all, was my son. His voice carried over the chatter, louder than usual, too loud for comfort. He's ruining my life, he said to anyone who'd listen. My own father. He stole my accounts. He's losing his mind. People turned, some pretending not to look. I didn't slow down until I was almost at the top of the steps. Then I stopped beside him. The air was warm still, holding that uncomfortable hush that happens when truth and rumor collide. You done talking, son? I asked. My voice wasn't angry, it was level. The kind that makes people listen. He looked at me, face flushed, jaw tight. You think you can humiliate me in front of everyone? I held up one folded sheet of paper, an official notice stamped by the county clerk. You already did that yourself, I said. That's the loan record you forged. These fine people can read for themselves whose signature sits beside mine. Silence spread like a slow tide. Someone from the clerk's office stepped out onto the landing. Another man pulled out his phone, recording. My son's face drained of color. His wife's father stood nearby, eyes down, shame pulling at his shoulders. I didn't say another word. I simply handed the paper to the clerk. For the record, I said. She nodded and took it. The crowd didn't move. That's when it happened, the moment everything reversed. The same mouths that had whispered about my decline now whispered about his fraud. One man muttered, "That's cold-blooded." Another said, "Can't hide truth long in this town." I turned and walked away. No shouting, no victory lap, just sunlight hitting the courthouse windows like a final stamp of clarity. That night I logged every detail. Time, place, witnesses. The motel manager helped me print stills from the security cameras that caught the confrontation from across the street. He slid the photo toward me and said, "You might want this for your file." I thanked him. Good to have neighbors who notice the right things. When I went to the station the next morning, Detective Harris was already waiting. He flipped through the photos and nodded. "This is enough to build a restraining order if things get ugly." "It's not ugly," I said. "It's just over." He looked at me carefully. "You sure about that?" I thought about the way my son's voice had cracked on those courthouse steps. The panic, the humiliation, the collapse beginning behind his eyes. "I'm sure," I said. "We filed the protective order anyway." Harris walked me through each section. Distance restrictions, contact rules, enforcement terms. It was clean, factual, unemotional. Paper is better than confrontation. It never raises its voice. Before I left, Harris said, "One more thing." He tried asking about property rights, something about squatters' laws. I almost smiled. Let him ask. Permission kills hostility. He never owned the roof he stood under. By afternoon, the restraining order had a case number, my name, his name, and the county seal pressed deep into the page. The clerk handed it to me gently as if it carried weight beyond paper. On the drive back, I stopped at the hardware store. A few locals were gathered near the counter. They nodded, some offered quiet words. "You did right, Walter. Had to be done. Truth's out now." I thanked them, bought a pack of light bulbs I didn't really need, and stepped back into the sunlight. The air was warm and easy again, the kind that feels like forgiveness without words. When I returned to the motel, I placed the new documents in the folder marked Legal Affairs, Active. The drawer closed softly, like a door that no longer needed locking. Outside, the evening light slid across the parking lot, touching everything evenly. No shadows left to hide in. He'd spent months shaping a story. 5 minutes on Main Street reshaped it for him. With the order filed and the circle closed, the next move wasn't his. The days that followed were slow, steady, and strangely peaceful. For the first time in months, my morning started without tension. I'd wake before sunrise, make motel coffee, and sit by the window watching the sky shift from gray to gold. Each day looked a little cleaner. The noise that used to fill my life, apologies, arguments, requests, was gone. Only paperwork remained, and that was the kind of noise I could live with. I spent Monday closing the last of the circles. I called the credit offices, each one by name, each conversation short and professional. "This is Walter Jennings," I'd begin, the same steady tone every time. "Remove my authorization, confirm the address update, and note that no shared accounts remain." They all said the same thing. "Understood. Mr. Jennings, you're secure." Each call ended with a reference ID, a timestamp, a written confirmation. I logged them all in a new binder labeled Final Records. The sound of the hole punch clicking through the pages felt more satisfying than any argument ever could. By midweek, Tom phoned from the courthouse. "The restraining order's been approved and served," he said. "He got the notice this morning." I didn't ask how he took it. "Within 500 feet, Tom continued. "Violation means arrest." He paused, then added softly, "You've done this right, Walt. No mess, no spite. Just order." I thanked him and hung up. For a long while I sat still, feeling that quiet weight lift off my chest. Justice doesn't come with applause, it comes with calm. But the calm didn't last long. That night, a neighbor from the motel knocked on my door. "You might want to see this," he said, handing me his phone. There it was, my son's newest story online, full of wild claims. Father abandons family, hides fortune. A dozen strangers chimed in with sympathy, not knowing a single fact. I didn't respond. I just forwarded the post to Tom and Detective Harris. By morning, Harris texted, "Handled. Defamation warning filed. Keep your receipts, Walter." I smiled at that. He knew I already did. Thursday afternoon brought the next ripple. A man from the finance company called to verify my son's address. Apparently, collectors had been knocking at the wrong door, mine. I gave them his new one and asked them to confirm they'd stop contacting me. "Of course, Mr. Jennings," the man said. "Your record's spotless. We'll redirect immediately." That word, spotless, stuck with me the rest of the day. When I stepped out that evening, the sun was low and the town felt hushed. People on the sidewalk nodded with the quiet understanding small towns reserve for the truth. At the hardware store, two men were talking by the counter. "Heard they served him papers," one said. "Guess lies don't last forever." I walked past without interrupting. The bell over the door rang once, clean and hollow, like punctuation at the end of a long sentence. The next morning brought another storm. This one smaller, desperate. He'd shown up near the motel parking lot, pacing, calling my name from a distance. The manager called the police before I could even open the door. Harris arrived 10 minutes later. They spoke to him quietly, their flashlights reflecting off the wet asphalt. No shouting, no cuffs, just quiet procedure. He left in his car and Harris came up to my room. "Violation confirmed," he said. "That's enough for enforcement if he tries again." "Will it come to that?" I asked. "Probably not," he said. "Men who lose their audience usually stop performing." After he left, I stood at the window watching the taillights fade into the night. I didn't feel triumph, just distance. Whatever story my son had built around himself had collapsed under its own weight. 2 days later, word spread that creditors had started visiting his office. Trucks with company logos parked outside. His staff whispered. By noon, his partner had quit. By evening, he'd cleared his desk. The man who once introduced me as just the old guy who paid bills once when was now the name whispered in pity. I never went near him. I didn't need to. Truth doesn't need an audience, it finds one. On Sunday morning, the world felt lighter. The sky was a hard, clean blue. I drove out to the lake where I used to take him fishing when he was little. The water was still. A single heron stood by the reeds, patient and unbothered. I sat on the hood of my truck, sipping coffee from a thermos, watching the reflection of the sky ripple across the surface. All the noise, all the pleading, all the hurt. It was behind me now. Justice hadn't come with thunder or revenge. It had arrived on letterhead stamped and signed. He built his story on credit. The bill finally came due. By the time the ink dried, the noise had stopped. And in that silence, I finally felt what I'd been chasing all along. Not victory, not forgiveness. Just peace. I didn't win. I just stopped losing. 3 weeks passed before he called again. The voicemail came early one morning, his voice small and stripped of its performance. "Dad, please, can we just meet once? Not about money, just talk. I listened twice before deleting it. But something in that tone, less pride, more gravity, stayed with me. The next day I dialed the number back. Meet me at Harper's Diner, I said. 10 a.m. Bring nothing but honesty. He agreed without hesitation. When I arrived, the place smelled like bacon and fresh coffee. The same waitress, Jo, nodded as I slid into the corner booth. A jukebox hummed softly near the door. 10 minutes later, he walked in, different somehow. Shoulders hunched, eyes sunken, the confident son replaced by a man who'd learned the weight of consequences. He sat down across from me without a word. Coffee? I asked. He nodded. We waited in silence while Jo poured 2 cups and disappeared again. The clink of spoons, the distant scrape of chairs, that was all. Finally, I said, you said you wanted to talk. Go ahead. He rubbed his palms together. I've lost everything, he said quietly. The business, the house. Dad, I'm sorry. His voice broke on the last word. I didn't rush to fill the silence. Apologies are like air after a storm. Most people don't mean to waste them, they just don't know how to breathe right yet. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. I didn't know what I was doing. I thought if I looked successful, maybe you'd finally be proud of me. I was proud, I said, until you started trading truth for appearances. He nodded, tears sliding down his face. I'll do anything to make it right. Just tell me how. I studied him for a moment. The man sitting across from me wasn't the son who'd mocked me in that ballroom. This one was quieter, stripped bare of defense. Start with honesty, I said. You want redemption? Then speak it out loud, publicly. Tell them what happened, tell them what you did, and stop hiding behind my name. He flinched. You mean confess? In front of everyone? You want forgiveness without truth. That's not forgiveness, that's comfort. He sat back, staring into the coffee that had gone cold. People will think I'm a fool. I shook my head. People already know. They're just waiting to see what kind of fool you'll choose to be. An honest one or a cowardly one. For a long time he didn't speak. Then in a small voice he said, Would you still come if I told them? I would listen, I said. But not to defend you, to witness you. He swallowed hard. And after that? After that, I said, you'll be free. Not rich, not admired. Just free. His shoulders trembled. The clock over the counter ticked louder than before. Finally, he whispered, You changed the will, didn't you? I did, I said. The properties are going to charity now. Veterans housing, food pantries, the hospital fund. None of this was ever about inheritance, it was about decency. He stared at me, lips trembling. So I get nothing. You get the chance to start over, I said. That's worth more than anything written on paper. He wiped his eyes, a small nod forming. Maybe that's what I needed. I hope so, I said softly. When the check came, I paid without thinking. As I slid the receipt across the table, he reached out, fingers brushing mine. I was wrong about you, he said. No, I replied. You were wrong about yourself. He stood slowly, straightened his jacket, and left the booth. I watched him walk to his car, the spring sunlight bouncing off the windshield. For the first time in a long while, he didn't look lost, just humbled. I stayed seated, staring at the half-empty coffee cup between my hands. There was no triumph, no gloating, only a quiet ache mixed with relief. Sometimes justice looks like distance. Sometimes mercy looks like letting someone finally face their own mirror. The jukebox clicked to a new song, a slow country tune I hadn't heard in years. Jo came by, topping off my cup. That looked hard, she said. It was necessary, I answered. She nodded. Hard and necessary usually travel together. When she walked away, I caught my reflection in the window. Older, smaller maybe, but still steady. The sky outside had cleared, a soft Carolina blue stretching far beyond the parking lot. I sat there a while longer, letting the coffee cool, watching the sunlight shift across the chrome napkin holder. Forgiveness is free. The following week passed like a slow tide. I didn't hear from him and I didn't expect to. But on Sunday morning, the church bell rang louder than usual, echoing across town, pulling me out of my chair by the window. I put on my clean shirt, buttoned it up, and drove toward the sound. Inside, the sanctuary smelled of old wood and hymn books. The pews were fuller than I'd seen in years. Folks nodded as I walked in, the way people do when they're not sure what to say but know you've earned their respect. I sat in the last row, quiet as the organ began to play. When Pastor Henry stepped up to the pulpit, his voice carried that gentle firmness small-town preachers seem born with. We've all witnessed struggle among our own, he said. And today truth comes home. Then my son stood up. He walked slowly down the aisle, every step weighted with history. His wife was in the front pew, head bowed. When he reached the front, he turned to face the congregation. The room went still. I need to say something, he began. His voice shook at first, but he didn't stop. I lied about my business. About my father. I used his name when I shouldn't have, and I blamed him when it all fell apart. I tried to build a life on pride instead of gratitude. And I was wrong. The silence that followed was heavy but not hostile, just honest. He continued. I wanted people to think I made it on my own, but everything good I ever had came from him. I disrespected that. I disrespected him. And I'm sorry. A few heads nodded. Someone whispered, Amen. I sat motionless, my hands clasped together. I didn't feel anger or even satisfaction, just an immense quiet relief. The kind that comes when the truth finally breathes after being buried too long. After he finished, the pastor placed a hand on his shoulder. Redemption begins with honesty, he said, and honesty begins with humility. The congregation rose in soft applause, not loud, not theatrical, just enough to remind him he wasn't alone anymore. After the service, people came up to shake his hand. No one spoke of shame. They spoke of courage. Truth has a way of cleaning even the mess it exposes. When I finally approached him, he looked unsure whether to hug me or just nod. I chose for him. I put a hand on his shoulder and said, You did the hardest part. Keep doing it. He nodded, eyes glassy. We stepped outside together into the spring light. The sky was a bright, forgiving blue. Across the street, the town's old war memorial gleamed, names carved in stone, reminders of people who stood for something bigger than themselves. Later that week, he sent a letter to the local paper, short, factual, humble. He admitted the debts, the misuse, and thanked the institutions that had handled it lawfully. I clipped the article and slipped it into my file. For once, his name looked right in print. The following month, I signed the final documents donating the lake property to a veterans housing program. The man from the charity shook my hand and said, This'll give folks a fresh start. I told him, That's all it's ever meant to do. When the work crews came to restore the house, I stood by the fence watching. Fresh paint covered old wood. New laughter replaced old arguments. Children ran across the grass, one of them chasing a paper airplane that caught the sunlight just right. I smiled. Maybe that was the legacy worth leaving. Not walls or money, but peace. That night I sat by the lake again, a thermos of coffee at my side. The water was calm, catching the reflection of the moon. Somewhere far across the surface, a frog croaked, and a breeze carried the faint scent of pine. My phone buzzed, a message from him. I meant what I said. I'm trying, Dad, one day at a time. I typed a short reply. That's enough. Then I set the phone down and watched the ripples fade. The world finally felt balanced again, small, honest, and quiet. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering without pain. The morning air off the water was cool and clean, the kind that carries no memory of storms. I sat on the old wooden bench by the lake, coffee in one hand, the world finally silent in the right way. The birds were louder now. Maybe they always had been, and I'd just been too busy listening to people instead of life. My phone buzzed once. A message from him again. Dad, we're keeping the baby name you suggested. Thought you'd want to know. I stared at the screen for a moment, then smiled, a small, quiet one. I typed back just 2 words, and I'm glad. No lecture, no sermon. The time for those was gone. He didn't need my permission anymore. And for the first time, I didn't need his understanding. That's the strange thing about peace. It shows up not when things are perfect, but when they stop needing to be. Weeks went by. The town moved on. The house at the lake filled with laughter from families who'd never met me. Children running on the grass I once mowed myself. Every time I drove by, I slowed down, just enough to see the porch light glowing. It wasn't my home anymore, but it was alive, and that was enough. I'd begun spending more time by the docks, repairing old fishing rods, teaching a few neighborhood kids how to cast a line. They'd call me Mr. J, and it made me laugh every time. No titles, no history, just a man and a line in the water. Sometimes I'd think about him. I pictured him holding that baby, realizing what it feels like to give everything without asking for thanks. Maybe one day he'd understand that being a father isn't about control. It's about building something that can stand without you. The afternoon sun broke through the clouds, scattering gold across the water. I sat back, feeling it warm my face. All the noise of the past months, the arguments, the accusations, the paperwork, had faded into something softer, something almost sacred. Peace doesn't arrive like thunder. It drifts in, slow as a sunset, honest as quiet breath. I stood, stretched my back, and took one last look at the still water before heading home. The wind carried the sound of children laughing somewhere behind me. It made me smile again, wider this time. Some endings don't close doors. They open quieter ones. It had been worth the wait. If this story moved you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I'd love to know how far a quiet story can travel.